There are a few sentiments online that maybe on a personal level I can never really get behind. The idea that people should be able to like what they like as long as it's not harming anyone, and the idea that a fandom should have no influence on how you view a series. Let's tackle the first one. Unless it's for a punchline to a joke or an exaggeration of condescension, I don't think I've ever really judged people for liking certain things, at least on my channel. That ends today, because as much as I would love for people to love what they love, some things are just non-negotiables for me, consciously or subconsciously. If your favorite anime has a pedophile as the protagonist, if you're on the edge of your seat awaiting the next Japanese romance show about a teacher grooming her little stepbro, if you're out here trying to choose your lolly of the season, if you prefer visual novels, or manhwa as a medium and you rep Superhibi, then I think I have every right to judge you. What you like says a lot about you, but how people from a certain subset of the internet act over their favorite pieces of media may also say a lot about said piece of media when you think about it. Which leads me to the second point of contention. Do you guys want to know something incredibly petty about me? I can't stand people who like everything. I know, shocker. Take one look at my channel and I just give off angry gremlin energy. Is he garbage? They hate minorities? Wait, he's Batman? But I genuinely cannot fathom the idea of mindlessly consuming media with no perspective or nothing really to say, except it was good. And I'm not talking about people who can't really articulate why they think the way they do. I'm talking about people who don't think at all. Their love, their passion for a series is nothing more than a thinly veiled version of brand loyalty, whether the brand is their favorite series or the brand of self-labeling as an enjoyer. The reason why these lesser beings tend to bother me is because I dislike the things they like. Okay, that's part of it. But no, my main reason is because overly positive people absolutely poison the well of media literacy and media discussions, specifically when it comes to critique. Whether it be YouTube, Twitter, anywhere online, you can never really state an opinion that's even slightly negative, even if it's coming from a place of caring for the quality of a series, because these people will quote you or talk over you, dogpiling you while saying things like, well, if you don't like it, then maybe you just didn't get it. What's ironic is that, well, they themselves don't get it, not really. Ask these people why they like what they like, and I bet you their reasons come from a thread they thought was cool, or some other general place in the great ether. Their way of thinking, their taste in media is entirely regurgitated. And what's worse is that some of these parrots use philosophy, religion, culture as a crutch for lackluster storytelling. And if you want evidence for anything I've just talked about, well, here we go. When you're on the internet, you naturally pick up on a few things. What attracts certain people, the factions a fanbase can grow, what happens when something deteriorates in quality. And we're going to discuss my experience with all of this, the Shounen fanbase's toxic positivity problem, and why using your own personal hyperfixation or subtextual insights for a piece of media should have no bearing on the quality of a work. Might as well put all of my cursed knowledge to good use. Last year, I decided to go back and revisit some of the first shows I ever watched, that being Hunter x Hunter and Fullmetal Alchemist. When I first watched these two, I was rather unimpressed. To be fair, I was being groomed, but reading it as both authors intended was a really enlightening experience for me. The thing that intrigued me was how accepting both mangas were. I don't even mean in the liberal sense. Hunter x Hunter is so interested in the inner workings of the human brain, having such a wide variety of characters and a wide variety of perspectives, most admittedly kind of evil, but not once do I think Togashi was condemning anyone for how they've been conditioned to think, as his general critiques of humanity carrying over from Yu Yu Hakusho stem from a collective sickness that we are forced to feed into because of our own instincts and pain. FMA is similar in that regret actively plagues the entire cast, whether it's our two brothers regretting pushing their egos too far, the soldiers of Ameshrius being complicit in war and being willing to be criminals to redeem themselves, even a dwarf in the flask regrets chasing after some fake amalgamation of intelligence and humanity. Our protagonists can't be consumed by sin because they know the depths of their own mistakes, and it's through introspecting over those mistakes that, like Hunter x Hunter, they're motivated to embrace who they are, while also reconciling with who they can be. Individuality is the sort of foreign idea in shonen. The idea that being the best version of yourself, or enlightened, is important, but also not letting that change the fact that you as an individual matter, despite your shortcomings or your upbringing. Broken systems often exist in these stories, and while I would never advocate for every manga to be about breaking those systems, it's heartbreaking how much of these stories allow these protagonists to indulge in these systems, no matter how detrimental they might be to preserving their own worth and personhood. That advocacy for self-loathing disguised as being a part of a bigger community isn't uncommon in certain Eastern cultures. The idea that you don't matter more than the bigger picture is a constant rhetoric used in these countries, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, of course. Who am I to say our social network is better than theirs? Where it becomes messed up is when you have stories about underdogs, marginalized people being told that they should lie down and let the system work through them. Where it becomes messed up is when you bring up harsh truths and sensitive topics in seemingly emotionally intelligent ways, only to then turn around towards the audience who've given you their trust and telling them they're pathetic for even considering the fact that they could have mattered in some way. And we wonder why people who have had no way of being accepted for how they express themselves turn out to be freaks and make degenerate shit like Mushoku Tensei. Ethnic cleansing, the removal of a race to suit a more homogenous culture, or the suppression of the self, isn't something authors came up with for drama. These are real issues, but with how some of these stories are written, it wouldn't surprise me if these mangakas genuinely thought they were geniuses for coming up with racism. These are all things we will go over again in a later part, so I digress.
I'm about to cyberbully again.
I have a complicated relationship with MHA, but I honestly hate having to explain why I find this story so despicable. I mean, sure, any story with a true fall-off will be greeted with despair and hatred, and there's a sense of if you weren't there, then you truly just don't get it. It's not like other shonen where the fall-off consists of cosmic ass pulls, a sling of bad fights, or the story turning out to not be as thoughtful as other people, thought it would be. Mind you, on the outset, sure, things are different, but there isn't really a massive and visible decline in quality. The art is still amazing. The fights are actually pretty good, better than they were before, and on the surface level, if you just turn your brain off, there are some tear-jerking moments. Cause after all, if the characters in the story cry, then we have to cry too, right?
The universal fanfare lasting almost half a minute is sin number 8.
Number 8? The movie just started! What were the first ones?
Nigga, greed, lust, sloth, envy.
And to begin with, I mean, who even liked MHA? Like, for real, who took MHA any more seriously than a kiddish superhero story full of tears and a cast of characters in a school setting we couldn't wait to get out of? The anime is focusing so much of its time and money on Class 1A definitely did not help. I have had conversations with people about how the war arc was ass in the anime because the buildup was terrible. Yeah, and I wonder whose fault that is. MHA was never concerned with aura. It was never a show with an antagonistic group with drip you could bring to school, or moves you can shout during sex. Especially when the fan base is so bad, I can definitely see why so many were put off of it. But this made it all the more difficult to talk about the series' faults, and its eventual fall off. No one thought this was an actual series made for actual people. With so many great animes out there, why would you give time to MHA? And that sucks, right? Because sure, MHA had a lot of arcs that were slogs to get through because of its bare-boned and overly cheesy school setting that took up way too many arcs for those characters to be as bland as they are, but when it locked in, when it got to the root of its world building, when it teased us with quirk lore, when Deku's closest friends got the fights and development they deserved, when the series, as opposed to its contemporaries, slowed the pace down to get us acquainted with these teenagers, When the author took time out of the story to give us details about costumes, the families of the cast, the relationships they've earned over the first year. When the series took a stab at true redemption, along with the complicated through-line of abuse, that's what made MHA not only special, but to this day incomparable to any big-name shonen that was coming out around this time, or even beforehand. In a world where Jujutsu Kaisen was giving us character deaths every week, in a post-Big 3 era where Bleach and Naruto had controversial endings and war arcs, MHA excelled at the things it tried to do, because despite the lingering issues MHA had during this period, it did what other shows couldn't, stayed committed to what it was trying to say. So you can imagine the turmoil I was in when my favorite stories started to deteriorate in quality. You can see why someone might want to voice their discomfort with the series' trajectory, in an attempt to reach other people who might feel the same way, and you might be able to understand the anguish I felt when others not only didn't feel the same way, but had no problem telling me why in toxic ways. I've been criticized as being an instigator before, someone who starts trouble with the petty goal of stirring the pot just for their own amusement. And if you haven't been paying attention, my channel has always been one of satirical elements that allow me to heighten the more contrarian aspects of my personality. But especially when MHA was ending, needless to say I was having a lot of fun reveling in vindication. But it didn't start out this way. During my early days on the internet, I was nothing but a kid, a not yet legal adult, where did this image come from, who wanted to merely share their opinion. I wrote threads, I critiqued the series in the fairest way I could, interacted with those who disagreed, arguing lovingly in their DMs. I even wrote a Google Doc full of changes I would personally make to the manga, while adding more prepubescent fanfiction elements. At the time, the arc we used to call Villain Hunt, now known as the Dark Deku arc, was dropping. An arc way too short for its own good, being less of a solo arc and more of a ground for exposition dumping, and momentary conflicts that showed that not only the results of the war were kind of unimportant beyond the aesthetic of ruined Japan and the damage everyone had to heal from, but the future of the cast was all but assured because the story at this point was afraid of stakes and consequences. The bath chapter was the start of a lot of people's misery, though I was already acquainted with the arc's issues so it didn't bother me so much. The anime was airing, and worry surrounding the treatment towards one of My Hero Academia's best arcs was rumbling.
Something in the way.
It was a very divisive period. Those who were analytical, productive, and all-around social pillars in the fanbase were voicing their disappointment in the franchise as it was. Others, who were hell-bent on enjoying the series, had no problem joining together to shit-talk these people to their face or behind, as if we wouldn't find out. If you didn't like the story, the fandom turned on you, found reasons to attack you, and assured that nothing was wrong at all with the manga or anime. Everyone, including me, were saying valid reasons for disliking the manga. Those who disagreed offered no credible reason themselves for still being so attached. Stating why the series was just as good as it was previously wasn't their mission. Their mission was just to shut you up. Their mission was to make you let them enjoy things. There was no dialogue, no productivity, just constant fighting. And during all of this, people found pretty ridiculous reasons to hate me. Whether that be calling my bout of fanfiction corny, or calling me ableist and transphobic because I told someone crying in a space over Bakugo's supposed death was a pretty Looney Tunes ass predicament and they shouldn't take the jokes about it so seriously. I lost friends over that. But that's kind of the central thesis, right? Self-awareness. The lack of self-awareness that allows people to cry over fiction publicly in the Twitter space and not be able to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The lack of self-awareness that made my friends at the time turn on me, despite seeing me be cooked so many times that they should know just to check in on me before joining on the mob first. The lack of self-awareness that makes people tell others that they have invalid reasons for disliking something, while not giving any valid reasons to believe otherwise. The lack of self-awareness that allows you to still adore a series that, if you've watched any of my content, hasn't even been itself for a long time. How long, you ask? How long has the series been lower than the standard it set for itself? How long have fans been talking over those passionate but a little disappointed? How long has the fandom been so divisive? Jesus Christ. Instigation? I like to call it an emotional response to years of having my thoughts and opinions be oppressed and my friendships ending over Looney Tunes ass predicaments. Even if you disagree with my methodology, I hope this video can at least show you how bad things have been for me, why I'm like this, why I can no longer afford to care about what others think, and why I'm calling this my curtain call.
Hey Eli, it's Asa. I watched your new video. I'm just gonna assume at this point that you get off on this or something. You know you lost, right? Like, everyone on the site thinks you're stupid and miserable. Like, a tweet came across my timeline the other day. I saw you rated Superman 2 stars the other day? 2 stars? I don't know why you do this to yourself. You know, you could be making videos about anything. You could be talking about... Look, just call me back when you get the chance, alright?
The time period is around 2020 to 2025. Have you guys ever heard of dark shonen? Yeah, it and soft seinen were interchangeable terms that were loosely thrown around to describe shonen that are more than your typical happy-go-lucky coming-of-age plot, and about serious things like humans becoming monsters and monsters becoming humans. Basically, it's a shorthand for people who like the big three seinen to explain why stories like JJK entertain their monkey brain so much. I've talked about why certain MHA fans like MHA, this is why JJK fans like JJK. It's very similar to Hunter x Hunter in writing style and maybe lean into more seinen tropes. In addition, cards on the table, these types of stories obviously make reference to real life philosophy, culture, religion, and literature, like there's no denying that. In fact, there's a sort of starter pack when it comes to analyzing stories like JJK and series with similar tones and ideas. Back in the day, you kinda had to know a thing or two about European philosophy and Eastern religion. If I had to summarize the similarities between Buddhism and someone like Nietzsche, and I don't care if I'm not saying his name correctly because I feel stupid for even talking about it, it would be the idea of self-idealization, the concept of finding your true self and accepting that self whatever means necessary. Becoming who you should be, separated from the very things that either hold you back, or the material things and relationships that keep you too tethered to the physical world. In Nietzsche's case, it comes through the form of being unshackled from shame. In most Eastern religions, it comes in the form of enlightenment, being so stripped of desires and insecurity that your entire spiritual essence is at peace. If all this seems silly to you, that's mostly because some of it is. Not only because these are black and white comic books made for children, not only because whether it be Kubo literally admitting to making most things on the spot as he goes, Gege admitting his story was a lot more shallow than he intended, not only because trying to fit a multi-chapter Japanese story within the confines of a singular ideology made by a German is a little ridiculous given Japan's very in-a-bubble-esque culture, but none of this really matters, does it? Sure, it's fun to pick apart a story, it's fun to analyze symbolism and break down how pieces of literature reflect the beliefs we as a society have grown to appreciate over thousands of years. But if your story sucks, symbolism and parallels to real-world ideologies can only do so much. You can make all the allusions to the Bible or ancient Roman texts you want, but if your Superman is joyless, reckless, and boring, then no amount of deep subtext is gonna make people like him. It might make him better than the Superman written by James Gunn, but that's kind of a given, isn't it?
Postmodernism does not like whatever is typically accepted. If you asked a postmodernist, they would say that the notion of something being typically accepted is the very limitation that modernism should have rebelled against.
JJK very blatantly rips apart the characteristic fabric of the very magazine that it is serialized in. In fact, we were treated to a time skip immediately after Gojo was unsealed, a decision that didn't sit right with many readers, but that I personally like for several reasons. For one, it obviously aligns with JJK's postmodern writing style. Secondly, it makes perfect sense that Gojo, the living weapon of the Jujutsu Society, wouldn't be allowed any downtime and moments of connection with others by the narrative. He's thrust into battle immediately after his return. It's a brilliant meta layer to Gojo and his burden in the story.
Of course, the act of consumption is very much subjective, but these are kind of the universal benchmarks I've found that people tend to agree make a good story. Does the plot make any sense? And are there any holes? Are the characters three-dimensional? And is the primary message followed up on and executed in a meaningful way? As we'll discuss, a lot of the pseudo-intellectual industry darlings immediately fall apart under this microscope. And as stated, if your writing isn't even that good aside from the subtext, then there's no way in hell that subtext can save it. Jujutsu Kaisen has a very bad character problem. The development of the cast is constantly sacrificed in favor of the next plot point. and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Plot-driven stories exist, but the characters themselves are conduits for what the series tries to say. The idea of a meaningless death, the danger of not having a purpose, and the way a cycle and inconsistent morality system can create the very negative emotions we fight every day. All of this is dropped for a battle royale and a gauntlet that ends up being a lot more soulless than it could have been. Plot points revolving around revenge in someone like Sukuna, family with the Sennen twins and Fushiguro siblings, and the hundreds of other clans the story just forgot or didn't want to touch on, not to mention the lore the series could have taken advantage of too. In order to get to the next fight, the story has to either drop or not allow these themes to fully flourish. Hopefully I can talk more about this when season 3 drops, because unfortunately the anime is so good that anime onlys probably think I'm lying, but that's nothing new because manga readers also think I'm lying and they read Hikari vs Kashimo.
Remind yourself daily that there is no way to happiness, rather happiness is the way. And the way being Wu Wei, as in the present moment, flowing with life.
You taking a quote from is that from Attack on Titan?
No, that's from
No,
Taoism.
I don't.
You have a very westernized idea of freedom, where it's very much how external factors impact you, and removing external factors. Is that correct?
In a way, I don't think AOT forgot its central thesis. I think it exaggerated it to the point of it being unrecognizable. Like, I don't think anyone is denying the series is about being trapped physically, mentally, and even culturally within an environment that stifles growth, and then later in an environment that thrives off of prejudice. But I think in its journey to explore how someone can become so reactionary in response to internment, the story goes out of left field with its themes and the plot becomes very goofy. Ethnic cleansing, martyrdom, time travel mechanics. I don't think a story like AOT needed any of this to get its point across, especially when, as a result, it forsakes the very characters that made AOT and its dark, ever-expansive world and captivating mystery so special. It goes from a story about making your own version of freedom to a story about freedom coming at the cost of personal, relational, and racial identity.
It's pretty obvious that the opinion on Bleach's writing and quality is, generally speaking, rather low. The irony of these statements is that in actuality, Bleach is so nuanced and complex in its writing that it often goes over the heads of people who would claim this. Rather than these criticisms meaning that the series of Bleach is something that has no depth beyond a surface level, what this truly reveals is that they lack the ability or desire to understand the symbolism and prevalent themes within this manga.
Bleach is a critic's worst nightmare. Part of the reason why is because of those disgusting, insufferable enjoyers. There are people who are wholesome little uwu babies who just want to go through life peacefully while engaging with all media under a positive light. Pathetic. But there's a different side of enjoyers, kind of tangential to pseudo-intellectuals, the meatheads. These guys are the bane of my existence. They have such a bias towards things that look cool that trying to engage with them about the quality of a series, or trying to have a conversation at all, is kind of impossible. And again, I must emphasize there's nothing wrong with not wanting to like deep a series or something. If you like big swords and deep ink on a page, I'd rather you just say that than make yourself out to be smarter than anyone else. But again, I reiterate that enjoyers pollute media discussions because, in the case of Bleach, these people not only grew up with the series, but Bleach has such an astronomical cool factor that it can't possibly be bad, and as per usual, something being cool isn't enough. It has to be deep, it has to be deconstructive, it has to be implicit. Long gone are the days when Bleach was the little bro of the big three. Long gone are the days that Bleach fumbling its last arc and declining in sales wasn't up for debate. Now people's mouths are left agape because how can something be this cool but be so ass? It's impossible. What's worse is that the responsibility is on me, right? I'm going against the grain. I'm the one who's supposed to tell you the ultra-radical magnum opus of Period is actually garbage. But it's really hard, because trying to describe what makes Bleach bad is like trying to pick up all the coins you dropped out of your pocket while you're trying to impress a girl, right? Like, you think you got all of them and the embarrassment is over, but some of them rolled away and you accidentally picked up a piece of gum instead. In my eyes, there's so much wrong about Bleach, and not all of it is easy to pinpoint or articulate, because the series, is so long and so dense and about so many things that trying to describe how one thing falls apart for you leads into how other parts falter. And those other parts are part of the slogfest that you low-key forgot because besides having a billion subplots, Bleach is often so boring and uninteresting with its long list of characters, most with arcs that go nowhere of note, an antagonist that represents the 1,000th form of death that you don't really care to understand because there's so many other shit villains you have to analyze. Like, okay, at first, I cared about the concept of a Quincy. At first, I was excited for their return, and at first, I even empathized with them because I was so tired of the story acting like Soul Society's fascism was just a normal thing I was supposed to accept, regardless of the fact that they're supposed to be a safe haven for dead souls, that anyone, literally anyone opposing them in any way, was refreshing. But as soon as the story developed most of them in shallow ways, giving them quote-unquote distinct and humorous archetypical personalities, the moment Bleach introduced a dimension and history for the Quincy's that once again doesn't really go anywhere, the moment the story makes them Nazi Jews, and the moment Bleach made all of that null by skipping their boss's last fight anyway, I was tapped out. Bleach has so much to say, so many things it wants to do with its storyline that every arc, every saga feels fundamentally different from the last. Entire cast members and themes just get dropped, and it doesn't help that the dialogue is so bad. Everyone is always yelling or arguing or insulting each other or just spouting fake deep dialogue about how life is meaningless and darkness is inevitable, and oh my goodness. If it weren't for the bloated and inflated chest sizes of some of these characters, I would be able to tell them apart! And no, seriously, does Kubo think this is attractive? The very power system that the series tries to develop through the Soul Reapers is repeatedly either dropped for something like Fullbring or made null due to contrivances that allow the characters to get out of their current predicaments, like in Thousand Year Blood War with everyone's manufactured bankais. This goes for villains too. There's always some Inspector Gadget bullshit that I'm just supposed to accept happens and not question any of it. The antagonists repeatedly change as well. Hollows at first are just souls not prepared to move on from the central plane of existence, but then they're given their own reality, their own culture, their own version of death. They grow to be Arankars, they poison Soul Reapers, except when they don't. They're thoughtless monsters who can form relationships, ideologies, and become the antithesis of someone else's character arc. Soul Society itself also makes no sense. Like, it's rife with poverty, oppression, and classism, and none of this is really, addressed. The story ignores that its very premise, Ichigo being the pillar and strength for those who can't fight for themselves as a way of coping with his own loss, falls apart the moment that it establishes that those in power of the afterlife are terrorists, and he's just not gonna do anything about it. Aizen wants to do something about it, but most of his screen time is spent slicking back his hair and predicting everything. And Yuha is more mad that Soul Society has gone soft rather than anything, more criminal about them. Meanwhile, Ichigo is finding himself for the 5th time. Rukia is simping for her abusive brother who never even apologized. Or he may miss the women's suffrage class and thinks he's just an object for Ichigo. Chad has been forgotten, and Ishida is busy writing Chojin X. I'm insecure about my videos. Can I admit that? I'm scared that I didn't tackle a topic well enough or that I misspoke when it came to an analysis or critique I posed. But Bleach is genuinely such a draining and confusing read with such drastic dips in quality, tone, writing style, characters, themes, that at this point, forget it, man. I can't de-Bleach. It's too much. I mean, you ask 7 different Bleach fans what the moon means, and you might get 7 different answers. Of course, Radman and his unemployed alumni have the time to be better equipped to take Bleach for what it is. They have a genuine passion for the series, which I don't, but also most of their threads and videos are just recaps of the plot. If they forget something, they can just go back to one of their 12-hour videos and watch it for a fact check. But you want to know what's really crazy about that? Even they have to ignore parts of this confusing 700-chapter story for a certain section to make sense.
I'm more than aware that later contexts from the 1000-Year Blood War reshape the way we see and understand Zangetsu, but for the purpose of this video, I will be focusing solely on the first 420 chapters of the series.
Bleach itself doesn't know what it is. It doesn't know what it wants to be. So why the hell have I been forcing myself to make sense of it across like 5 videos? Why have I been trying to accurately articulate why I dislike the series so much to people who are frankly brainwashed? I mean, it's not like everything I dislike about Bleach can literally just change the next arc, so frankly, it's not productive. While this was all going on, there was a war on Anna Twitter. It might be worse than the war that we are going to fight for Mr. Trump.
We? Now we going to war. What do you mean we? Nintendo? No.
At the center of it was Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia, 2 brand new pillars of shonen with fandoms fighting amongst themselves to prove who's superior. You can probably guess what side I ended up on. Regrettably. Regardless, at the core of this battle was the idea of intelligence versus lack thereof. The thinking that if you had any problems with Jujutsu Kaisen, they resulted from a lack of truly understanding the story, because if you did, then obviously you wouldn't have the problems you do, right? This was annoying to say the least. The idea that you can't dislike something without passionately picking apart its particles is pure madness, especially when these people can never do the same for things they like, as we've discussed. Of course, media literacy is at an all-time low. You can have bad faith or biased reasons for disliking something, and of course analyzing a piece of work does often create the most valuable and productive form of hatred. Just look at me. However, if you're at all like me, a sane human being, and ironically unlike those same fans who do have an allegiance or bias, you weren't an MHA fan just wanting to hate on the competition. You loved MHA because it gave you something a story like JJK failed to give time and time again. A story that truly cared for the characters. My Hero Academia took the time to make sure the cast was treated like actual human beings, people that you personally got acquainted with, as opposed to a story like JJK that made the cast feel more like plot devices than anything else. All that mattered was that MHA's story resonated, because Jujutsu Kaisen was never really concerned about resonating with anybody. And when it was all said and done, by the end, even the author agreed with that sentiment. This is why I can't help but roll my eyes when these pseudo-intellectual industry darlings are brought up as stories that are profound. These stories skip over the complexities of the characters for some sort of efficient writing style. We don't know how they got to the conclusions they got to, they just get to them. Jujutsu Kaisen specifically isn't deep because of its allusions to Buddhism, or its references to its influences, because it never commits to exploring any of these things in a meaningful way, ways that would make it matter more than just a simple aesthetic. Also, the author's literal name means, "my story is a sack of shit." He's aware of his own flaws as an author, and if Gege himself writes a chapter about how nonsensical the final arc was, I really don't see how there's room for debate on this topic. Bleach at this point might be beyond my patience, but I could rebuttal these r/deep Jujutsu Kaisen videos for hours. But not only am I a lazy piece of shit who's tired of only being able to work with manga panels and season 2 footage.
No, I'm done. You're done? I'm done wasting time. I'm about to get started. Oh, you done wasting time?
My annoyance with how people treat art like it's a philosophy 101 assignment has been well documented. I'm just choosing to be a little more direct for my new baby review series.
It's not about him. It's not about him. Ah, for Christ's sake, say his name! Say his name, you coward! Say his name!
Furthermore, not only do I think people generally look at things too deeply, I just think they're wrong. These stories might be about the self and becoming one with who you really are on a spiritual level, but if you actually read these stories, their ideas of valuing the self are rather contradictory. True enlightenment does not come from avoiding conformity and embracing some sort of individuality. I know, on this channel, I've harped on it enough, but it's still crazy how the central premise of Bleach, exploring death and giving those who experience or are afraid of it some sort of peace, is almost immediately dropped as Ichigo defends the very people who are the very thing he swears to protect others from. Yuji might assert a positive meaning behind the concept of being a cog, knowing that everyone has their roles, but at the end of the day, he's still a cog, being nothing more than a machine that just fights spirits for the rest of his life, along with all of his friends. Eren might value his freedom, but that freedom comes through the genocide of others. For stories about finding your own independence, it makes damn sure that independence doesn't come at the cost of societal harmony. These characters do try to fight against systems that limit freedom, but it seems like those systems won anyway.
So you expect people to speak out every time something negative is said, otherwise they're a part of it?
that is what being complicit is in something.
So
just say, yo, like, yo.
The time period is the late 2000s to the early 2010s. I was not a part of the anime fandom during that time, my attention was spent elsewhere, but I saw it from afar, when kids did Naruto runs at school, when power scaling Goku against your classmate's favorite character was a common recess pastime, when Linkin Park was placed over Bleach AMVs, when you couldn't escape One Piece fan art. What a time to be alive, right? When you've been terminally online as long as I have, you grow to notice patterns. The shippers will always be toxic, the power scalers will always be wrong, and the theory crafters will always be in over their heads. And as bad as the My Hero fanbase was to me, at the end of the day, they were a fandom. They do what fandoms do, and I've learned that no matter what, that culture, that language will follow me everywhere on the internet. For better or worse, it's normal. The era of pseudo-intellectuals was abnormal. There will always be people who will overthink and reach when it comes to their analysis, but a collective of right-winged, Eastern-obsessed Brits who apply ancient philosophy to text is something new. And excuse me for being dramatic, but it was damn near an invasion of fandom spaces. And you could tell. Sure, some of them still honest to God appreciate the medium, but a lot of them just left. They saw the stories they liked sucked and jumped ship, leaving nothing behind but online trauma, for me at least. You might be asking why I'm covering something like this in big 2025, but it's because I'm pissed off, man. It's not fair. Why must I be forced to move on to other things and maybe better things when my experience with these individuals still lingers on my mind, given just how difficult all of it was? In my experiences, they belittled the intelligence of those around them, coded their malice and nonchalance so you could look like the crazy one, invaded group chats and judged you for not liking the same things they did, avoided discussions with you entirely based on the fact they thought you didn't get it, and while they were at it, they belittled and embarrassed the way you chose to express yourself on the internet in front of all of their friends. And we're supposed to pretend these conservative chuckle fucks didn't colonize the way people talked about a medium that I loved for so long.
YBG Don from DC.
What's your name?
I don't care if you think a story is deep, or how deep it is, or how deep you're willing to go in justifying how deep you've made it. In the same way that I think lolly culture and eroticism has suffocated the culture of manga and refuses to go away even during the hiatuses of ReZero, this fascination with making everything implicit and subtextual suffocates the very magic these stories try to create. These are not intellectual think pieces. This medium is not literature homework. This is art. And by condemning those who don't see that art the same way you do, you are terraforming a community that, to put it frankly, you don't belong in. You are giving meaning to things without it. You are giving bad stories justification for being bad. You're diluting the validity of valid criticism. And it's 2025, and you're still doing it. The irritation of people giving poorly written decisions grace because of philosophy or a religious undertone. The distance I felt from friends who could barely hold a conversation with me sometimes because I didn't feel the way about these stories they did. The embarrassment of being lumped in with those who don't understand the story and just use it as an opportunity for slander, when my criticism has always come from a place of actually caring and trying to meet an author halfway. The disrespect from those who thought they were mentally and politically better than me. The exhaustion that made my victory in the long run not even properly register. And the second guessing that led me to believe I'm everything these people think of me. Even if the concept of deeping something to this level intrigued me, how am I supposed to do that under these conditions? The time period is 2025, and the era of these people is kinda over. And I'm hoping now that online discourse can go back to normal, maybe with a better sense of inclusivity, weirdos with a pure passion for a medium they love, and shounen that perfectly back up where that passion comes from. A community not full of IQ measuring contests, but people who are brought together because of the stories that they love to discuss. A community that no longer has any need for ego or faux intelligence. A community that maybe you don't see eye to eye with, but you can still come out of those disagreements in one piece. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Shounen Reclaim Show. Oh, Eri. I'm gonna get you out of here, I promise. Not only does the story not deserve her, but honestly, y'all don't deserve her. On everybody's soul, she's the best character in the series, and if you disagree, come kill Hinokami J about it. She's adorable and she's my daughter. I could stop the analysis there, but that really encapsulates why she's so important to me. My Hero Academia Season 4 was the first time I watched the show weekly, and she was the focal point of that season. She was a gateway for me in that regard, but she was also a gateway for the new MHA. The series was becoming darker, dealing with more pressing issues, and Eri was the first in a long line of abuse victims in the story. The motif of smiling when things get too hard, the motif of dancing as a showcase of your own freedom, all began with her. She was the bridge into what MHA was and what MHA started being, and it helped immensely that her introduction started easily one of the best runs in Shounen I've yet seen be defeated. She was more than a plot device, and she was more than a damsel. She was allowed a future and a chance of finding herself, and with her, saving people started to take on another meaning, not just physically but emotionally, not just good people but victims of the system. The series that once dedicated a whole arc to changing the meaning of saving someone became a story so uninterested in truly saving anyone. It's no wonder then that the story carelessly made someone like Eri so unimportant and maim her just for the sake of the plot. Two things that are too similar to what happened to people like the League, the traumatized kids like some of the cast members, the heteromorphs, and even to our main character, who, if you've been paying attention at all, is a metaphor for disabled people. It's not just an Eri problem, the story has an outcast problem. Maybe this bothers me so much because so often I found that I am the outcast. No one's really proud of their high school selves. I mean, we're kids dealing with hormones, new emotions, and an education system that asks us to bear all of that at 6 o'clock in the morning. I had a lot of friends, but a lack of deeper relationships. So with that emotional exhaustion and loneliness, I turned to the internet. I had a history of being online, but Twitter was the first time I actually got truly invested into a site long term. I kind of needed to as an outlet for socializing and expressing myself. So when you're a lonely teenager thrusted into an environment with, let's be frank here, secret social rules and etiquette that are a complete mystery to you, and your favorite story sucks along that time too, you're kind of in for a disaster. I've made some real connections through my time on Twitter and through the MHA fanbase, but I've made a lot of enemies. Some of it was my fault, but most of it wasn't. If you were connected to the fanbase and you showed even a little bit of dislike for where the story was headed, or what the anime was doing to the story's best content, oh boy. That's why I can never agree with the sentiment that when Season 5 was airing and Villain Hunt was dropping, that it was impossible to truly be happy on either side. It was nothing short of infuriating to be faced with honest-to-God disdain and misery because a show you love so dearly deteriorated in quality, and the only reason people weren't seeing it was because of some kind of brand loyalty. Just look at my comment sections, dog. Sure, I play into the conniving, cynical critic that so many label me as, but it goes far beyond calling out my snark and my antagonism. These people hate me for disagreeing with them. Do you know how hurtful it is to work on a video with some of your closest friends who have been in the trenches with you, only for that same video to get trashed by people who didn't even see the value of that work enough to give it a fair shot and watch the whole thing? And then one of the guys in that video go on to make a video of their own, using part of yours for the basis of theirs, uploading theirs before you could even finish post-production on yours, and they get double the view counts with none of the hate. No disrespect to Sync, if he wasn't a great person and an amazing YouTuber, I wouldn't have worked with him. But my name, my experience with the fandom has been so traumatic, so tarnished, that we can by proxy make very similar projects, so much so that they share parts of the same script, and we get vastly different receptions for it. Call it karma, call it the consequences of my actions, call it whatever you want. My main point is, my experience with the fandom was awful. My experience with the story was awful. And when all was said and done, I felt just as alone at the end of it all as I did when I decided to download Twitter in the first place. I guess what I've been trying to say is that my experience on the internet has been relatively shitty, and at the very least, if the sheep-like vitriol was saved for good stories, then maybe I'd be more sympathetic, but MHA is just not a good story. Maybe there's a reason Horikoshi's previous works never got picked up. His serializations have been rejected one after another, and while I have yet to go back and read them, aside from Tenko, they seem, I don't know, fine. But MHA was Hori's last attempt, his make-or-break moment. When he tells us his self-insert is Deku, it's obvious to me. Both had a dream, a passion that the world kept telling them that they're not good enough for, so they aimed to quit. But they give it one last shot just to tell themselves that they tried, because they really can't help themselves. However, like Izuku getting brought into his dream job, Horikoshi succeeded. It might not be doing KNY or One Piece numbers, but MHA is still fairly popular, especially in Japan. And initially, Horikoshi took advantage of his newly formed platform to vent about his frustrations and critiques on the society that has rejected and abused him as well as others. At least, that's what I presume, given how much emotional attention he gave these topics at the time. His author notes are usually just him talking about how he's butt buddies with Gege, so, you know, not much to go off of. But he backed out. Instead of committing to these topics, maybe as a fear response that his baby would have been rejected by the very people he aims to critique, he copped out of giving those marginalized and abused fair and good endings, and, like his contemporaries, assured that the society that maybe deep down at some point he wanted to himself destroy like his characters would continue to exist and claim victory in the end, so much so that the boy who works so hard to be accepted by his peers and the people he wants to save end up withdrawing from his life when he's of no longer use heroically, left to be a loner in an ocean of societal issues, some of which may have been resolved, but in very patronizing ways that don't give any answers to questions that Horikoshi was definitely not equipped to even ask. People wondered why I was so high and mighty in the last episode. Because everyone has the right to their opinion and how they interpret media, why fight pseudo-intellectualism with pseudo-intellectualism? If there's anyone like me who feels like the world is against them but chooses to keep being themselves in a sea of people who can't think for themselves, then you should know that maybe in a sense, you are better than the rest. The truth is, being put on a projector, being on people's minds in such a negative light, has always gave me anxiety. Not only do I hate being perceived, I also hate being disliked. So my tone, the tone that has possibly severed my connection to like-minded people, is nothing more than a response to all of the bullshit. But at the end of the day, despite everything I've been through, I'm still me. And in that way, maybe My Hero Academia did teach me something. It taught me what not to do when you're standing against those who may reject what you've wanted to say for years. It taught me that when you're really in your bag, you shouldn't let the voices in your head make you second guess yourself. Because when you do, when you start giving a shit about what others think, you get My Hero Academia's final act. Now, trust me, I know some of my Bleach takes can be a little hard to digest, but don't worry, I have the best, the most credible cosign you could ever imagine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the biggest One Piece fan, the biggest Bleach fan of all time, Radman Yahoo.
I've been saying Bleach is built like a FromSoft game, from the lore to the approach to boss fights and how it handles power creep as the story game progresses. What is this nigga talking about?
You know, it's funny because FromSoft is often criticized to just make the same game over and over again. I don't know if he knows that.
Not gonna lie, I wish Kubo spelled out some more lore and just gave us some blatant exposition here and there, because holy shit, I'm getting tired of having to dig like a mother effer just to understand some basic elements of the lore. Is he being sarcastic here, or is he like actually waking up from the genjutsu here?
I know, right? Like, damn, tell us how you really feel, Reddington.
Imagine Bleach if Kubo was actually good at plotting. Might have been. I don't have a single female character in my top 50, and I don't care what the fuck you niggas have to say about it. Oh my god, bro. Bro, the misogyny is rooted, bro. It's rooted in generations, bro. The generational misogyny, man. Wait. What does this have to do with your video, though? Because I know what video you're working on for this. Nigga, what does this have to do?
Oh, nothing in the slightest. I just think this one is funny. So remember, if you're a Bleach fan and you're typing up a hate comment or a hate tweet, just know that your Hive leader agrees with me. And if he's not your Hive leader, please point me in his direction so I can make fun of him too. Thanks.
I see dead people.
Chainsaw Man has a lot of themes about the act of intimacy, sexual assault, and how Denji doesn't know where the line is drawn between the two. He feels these sexual tendencies, but has no idea what to do with them, or what they say about him as a person, and when he finally gets an idea, he's deeply ashamed about it. The thing is, this story goes beyond having themes of sex and just leaving it at that. The story itself is unabashedly horny, and it's never clear if the sexual nature of the story is for writing purposes or for Fujimoto's own self-gratification. At one point it was clear. Part 1 was very much a story about learning about one's own sexuality, or at least the trajectory of the series, plus where Denji's arc was going, certainly implied that for me. But now, that sense of sincerity and sensitivity are now made less impactful, either for the sake of humor or something way darker. When Yoru rubs her ass against Denji's crotch, is it to cement herself as a femme fatale, or is it because Fuji enjoys a lap dance? When Yoru jerks Denji off, I want to believe it's for plot reasons, but it's so grotesque I can't help but feel like somebody on the staff is getting off to it. Why did he write this? When Denji is forced to be subservient and proceeds to be sat on or swallow a squid's tentacles or plays toy for Yoru's deviousness, it feels like an unfortunate regression, but at the same time, the punchline to a sex joke that Part 1 would have never told. Which is why Chainsaw Man feels like it's in a rut. Is Fujimoto trading writing for his own enjoyment, or is the plot going in circles the point? And if it is there not a better, more mature, restrained, and more importantly, more well-drawn way of conveying its purposeful regression? People get mad when others make fun of Chainsaw Man, but I mean,
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it!
Get off me!
everything's a joke now. The cast, the characters, the story. Because when you make a story that, unlike Look Back, is fundamentally not about you, but an attempt at a faux abuse story in a shonen genre flip, after a while, you just run out of things to pull from. So your series just becomes Family Guy.
Dude, why do you keep trying to make Hitler work?
Christ, if I had a nickel for every creator in 2025 who was too porn-brained to operate a craft they once excelled at, well, you know the quote, don't you? And you know what's crazy? Not only is there a precedent for dopamine-deprived weirdos in the manga industry, a lot of them are successful, and a greater number of them are very talented in spite or maybe even because they're weirdos. Being a degenerate and being able to write for Japanese teenagers is a match made in heaven over in the East. But I don't know, man, the way Fujimoto does it has no passion. Maybe because he doesn't fully commit to it, as he's still trying to mask his degeneracy as plot. Maybe it's that the other weirdos have found a way to make their weirdness plot relevant, or at least one and done moments we're just supposed to fly by, so mangakas can collect their ADHD and focus. Maybe the artistry of his horniness just isn't hitting. Whatever it is, if Denji isn't gonna say it, then I'm gonna say it. Please stop!
So thankfully, I live in Tennessee. I don't live in California or anything. I'm able to legally own a gun. I've owned this for a while, and I'm going to tell you right now.
They say that the antics of a fanbase shouldn't dictate how you enjoy a piece of work. That it's impossible for certain pieces of media to either invite or glorify the toxic behavior of some of its fans. People who say this obviously have never been in contact with a lolicon. If I had to categorize these people's innate thinking patterns, it would be something along the lines of, I like kids and I'm racist, or something. There are some gross people out there, and unfortunately a lot of what anime is and what shonen appeals to targets these people, encouraging their degeneracy. Now with that being said, truth be told, I have no idea what series like Free Ren do to attract these kinds of people. My best guess is it's a show that's comfort food for weirdos who have been outcasted growing up. Shows that unfortunately have been adopted by grifters in attempts to get these weirdos to consider more toxic ideologies for coping mechanisms. Free Ren isn't the best example of this, but it is the most recent. And because I'm biased, I refuse to speak further on Dandadan. Also, tangentially, anime is in a weird place because while most characters are teenagers, they never really feel like it. Either because of the things they go through or the way they're written. There's only been a few instances I can come up with where the cast feel like actual kids, and not just heightened and exaggerated 2D plot devices. You add this with the glorification that Japan places on youth, and it all just creates a gigantic gray area where what's acceptably horny and what isn't is really hard to tell. For some people. Wouldn't let that shit happen to me though. However, that's not really what I'm referring to when I mention these lollymancers. Not only do some of these fans indulge in that sexuality way past the exaggeration that's on display, but the fact that these characters are so young doesn't seem to matter. In fact, most of these people wish they were younger. They don't seem to grapple with the way adolescent sexuality is portrayed. They seem to desire it, and if you're someone who might not be comfortable with the depictions of more lustful elements, then you're nothing but a tourist. Meaning, if you're not a pedophile, you're not a real anime fan. You know, people who make defending lollies, liking lollies, and embracing lolly culture their whole personality.
Here's another example, someone going after Chibi Review, saying he's mad that now he's gonna go to prison because of his lolly collection. I can't make this shit up.
Like, when Chibi goes out of his way to post only the most explicit scenes from Dress Up Darling, I don't get the sense he's genuinely enjoying the show in spite of, or even tangentially because of how horny it is. I get the sense he's only here to goon, pretty much. And while Chibi is busy jerking it, his fans and people like them are continuing to create a divide in the anime community with their hatred of black people. Hood weebs, sorry, I apologize. And while there's definitely something to be said about people bullying the guy, there's something so pathetic about being co-opted by the right at his big age just because they're the only ones who feel bad enough to give you money.
But the man is a midget.
He's not the only creator like this, trust me. We're gonna delve into other creators that indulge in conservatism on the low. And while right now he is the biggest, let it be known that he's not the final boss of Anna Twitter or something. He's merely the best encapsulation of multiple problems with the community. I honestly don't know who would be a better frontman. Probably the anime man. There is something to be said, however, about the monumental amount of horny slop that comes out of Japanese animation. But at the very least, cultural standards allow me to rationalize why these depraved works are made in the first place. If you're in the West, I don't think you have an excuse.
I'm just saying, I was talking to some friends and I was trying to tell them, you know, Shounen never was a genre to be in touch with feelings and shit. Like, and I was talking to this girl and she was talking about how every anime is the same. It's just screaming and hooting and hollering and all this testosterone when ain't nobody, you know, really trying to pull her heartstrings or say anything meaningful, you know. You want to know what she told me? Just check this out. This is what she said. She said,
Chainsaw Man had a really cool aesthetic, had suspenseful horror, and its art was weird but creative. Its fights were bombastic and its humor was definitely distinct, which is why I liked it, and I guarantee you that's why the general manga crowd likes it. But as I've gone over in the last couple of episodes in the series, the way fandoms move has gotten a lot more complicated over the years. Firstly, in comparison to, let's say, the Big Three's long-form storytelling coded in nostalgia, My Hero's Western influences and tone, and JJK's anti-shonen nature, CSM is this weird middle ground where it certainly is a battle shonen, but pretty much has none of the qualities that would align it with that genre. None of its tropes, none of its conventions. Its soul is very different from the soul of a typical battle manga. It's a Western shonen jump manga that refuses to act like one, as opposed to, say, Black Clover or Demon Slayer, which are so unabashedly shonen that their popularity makes sense to me. The amount of assistants Fujimoto had that would go on to make their own manga is something very inspirational, actually. And while I have problems with most of them, whether it be Spy Family's resistance towards plot progression, the ass pulls that act counter to Jigoro Kuraku's amazing tone and pretty good character writing, Dandadan's adoration for love triangles that makes the main couple's dynamic hard to be patient over, and the fact that Centuria seems like a very beautiful story, but unfortunately it's 2025 and we left reading in the past. Regardless, at least at one point, all of these manga knew what they were and wanted to be, and stayed consistent with that identity for a majority of its run. Dandadan itself is also an experiment, since the author had no exposure to shoujo writing tropes until doing research for his manga, but its identity as a zany rom-com with major sci-fi and spiritual elements never feels diverged from. It's one of the reasons why I think a lot of the Fujoshi-esque internet dwellers who tend to make things seem smarter than intended chose Chainsaw Man. Most of them just wanted to be different, and you can see this in the way most of them talk about normal shonen, or manga that isn't some shoujo fluff from the 80s. Cause otherwise, shonen battle manga fans obsessing over a story that is fundamentally so different from shonen battle manga is just an equation I personally can't solve. Which brings me to my second point. Putting my feelings about a lot of the popular battle shonen aside, they were at the very least superbly high quality at one point in their run. And breaking away from what makes the genre so identifiable doesn't mean your work won't be. But if you're going to ignore the very things that are at the heart of the genre you're putting yourself in to tell a new story, it better be specific, passionate, and sustainable. But Chainsaw Man simply isn't. Everything Fujimoto could say about himself, every story he would want to make for himself, and everything he wishes to satirize was done in all of his previous works. Chainsaw Man is not a work he's gleaned from himself, it's a work he's gleaned from his influences, his interests. CSM is an experimental work, meant to emulate abusive and serial case studies Fujimoto was never a part of. It's no wonder then that the story feels like it's coasting through writer's block. A story that's not about you is very hard to write, which explains the deteriorating quality of the series. Consequently, it's as if the worse a manga gets, the more parasocial and obsessed the fandom gets. So I guess in that regard, Chainsaw Man really isn't that different from the things I've covered. Regardless, I still got some things I want to say. When Part 2 first started, it was the delightful change of pace. Seemingly taking cues from JoJo, we went from a parody of Western action movies to a parody of shoujo rom-com, and while it definitely wasn't as exciting as what came before, it had the same sense of character work Part 1 had. Asa was a very relatable main character whose insecurities were palpable, and Denji's sparseness allowed his appearances to feel more special. However, I was already starting to feel certain issues that might take on worse forms later, like how short the chapters felt to read, the amount of breaks Fujimoto was taking which made the story feel slower, Nayuta's gag character tendencies getting in the way of more time spent between Asa and Denji, chapters ending on sex jokes. Part 2 definitely started to bring up interesting directions for the rest of the series, but Part 2 has been very shaky even before the immediate drop in quality when we switched main characters. Unlike a JoJo, this part's identity wasn't even cemented yet before it started falling off. Part 2 was only fairly good for 20 chapters when Asa was the protagonist, and the formula shakeup had real potential, and even the quality of those chapters pale in comparison to every other first impression we've ever gotten for a Fujimoto project. But that's kind of what I want to get at. Chainsaw Man Part 1 was very good for its own specific reasons. Paneling, humor, set pieces, its mastery at tonal whiplash. It was an honest-to-God horror show, but none of that is necessarily sustainable. What was good about Chainsaw Man Part 1 cannot be manufactured again and again, in the same way that what was good about a Black Clover or Naruto could. It was something that was meant to exist at a time, and whether that be through other projects or a changing up of the status quo, we were supposed to creatively move on and grow. But a lot of Part 2's problems stem from trying to recreate the sense of emotional dread while not really committing to it, while also not drawing it that well. Furthermore, those things I liked about Part 1 are things people never talk about anymore. Chainsaw Man's fanbase is not made up of action-hungry meatheads who are in love with the commitment to an aesthetic and CSM's stylish way of interpreting boyhood. The days where Chainsaw Man's fanbase crossed over with JJK's are long gone, and even then all they did was fight with each other. Now, people only really talk about how it's not like other shonen. This manga actually says something meaningful. It's gotten so bad that there are people that celebrate the main character not raping someone.
You know, that's romantic.
Like, what the f are we doing? This is again a case where I wish people were more honest about what they liked. There's nothing more honest than saying you like cool shit because it's cool, but I expressed my frustration at people's embarrassment over this fact. Because once again, being cool isn't enough. Every story has to be this profound and deep piece of work, because otherwise, well, it might as well be meaningless. And just as My Hero Academia fans don very performative political personas, the Chainsaw Man fanbase is somehow worse in this regard. In the same way that right-winged fascism oppresses any sort of individuality, and has sucked the life out of fandom culture in more ways than one, Chainsaw Man fans are so woke that they accidentally turn around to judging those who aren't as radicalized in their approach to analysis or how they behave on the site. They're very pretentious about their leftist ideology, not seeing the irony in how they belittle others in the fanbase when they're male or straight, or how they objectify male characters in fiction, or how they fixate on Yuri-esque relationships, or shoujo in general. Again, not seeing the irony in that these are what unfortunately named dude bros do, just with the opposite sex. I would show you the tweets, but I'm good, man. I may have muted or blocked every individual like this and refused to dig back into the hellhole. You see, pseudo-intellectuals annoy me, MHA fans are funny to laugh at, pedophiles are an easy dunk, but Chainsaw Man's fans? There's nothing fun about picking on them. They're legit annoying. And the Twitter specifically is like a ghetto with territories, I found. In one corner, you have the gooners, people who are involved with medium for their own sexual gratification, whether it be their unconcerned fascination with lolly culture, their obsession with cutesy waifu culture, or overbearing fujoshi culture. You also have the enjoyers, people who mindlessly consume without much forethought to whether the media is actually of quality or not. If it is, well, you wouldn't know. They're too busy chastising you for thinking otherwise to tell you why. Some justify this behavior by how cool a manga is, some by how smart it is. Whatever the case, they are entities that automatically give out 10 out of 10s and judge you for not doing the same. So how does this all fit together? Well, what if I told you that Chainsaw Man has a fan base, a collective of individuals with a little bit of everything, a bit of bad from every world. People have turned Chainsaw Man from a meaningful coming-of-age story, with symbolism that the author himself is happy to admit exists and in what forms, to a sort of postmodern revolutionary commentary on the world of today's ideas of feminism, sex, mental health, and how Chainsaw Man wants to comment on the corporate West and the commodification of war and... Okay, yeah, you lost me. I have to once again reiterate, it's not that some of these things aren't there. It's not even that the fact I think analyzing something to this extent is wrong. If you want an overall thesis for the Shounen Reclaim's first season, I guess it would be that, for me, there's a threshold of how much a story should be good before I start throwing all that subtext and shit at it. Because not only can fans exaggerate or make up subtext that wasn't intended, that subtext is meaningless if the actual writing is bad. And as long as fans continue to be annoying about the subject, and as they start to appear more and more inconsiderate and mindless when it comes to media consumption, I feel all the more better about this threshold. It's a good thing then that Chainsaw Man for the most part is, or at least was, good. I just don't think that it was so good that it warrants all of this. There was a time where I really enjoyed Chainsaw Man, its introspection and slower moments contrasted with its spectacle and faster moments, the struggle of trying to learn about yourself when everyone around you is almost trying to discourage that. It exists in a long line of stories that tell their audiences that maybe those who are trusted in such an intimate and familial way might not have your best interests at heart. It was good, man. And there's a good amount of Part 2's beginning and Part 2's recent endeavors that I still like, but I'm just so tired of the cycle. Audiences today simply can never admit that their favorite story has morphed into something different. They're afraid that recognizing the flaws in what they like can invalidate their own experiences and attachments to it, because the media has consumed their central identity, so they try to cover these flaws with hidden meanings and subtext that you just don't understand if you're someone who dislikes the series. Chainsaw Man is in its gas leak period. It's obvious in the writing and the art that the passion just isn't all the way there, and when it is, it's maybe put in the wrong places. The handjob chapter is somehow one of the best illustrated chapters in Part 2's latter half, and I don't know what to make of that. Fandom's becoming a cult is unfortunately not a new phenomenon. Hell, I've seen people collect pieces of media like Infinity Stones to add to their collection of Tumblr core or some sort of dark shonen moniker. It's just especially ridiculous with Chainsaw Man because of how different it is from the rest. So different, I'm unable to box it into a specific core that would appeal to an audience that moves like these other symbiotic fandoms do. It is actually an insane phenomenon, and the fact I've only seen such sheep-esque aptitudes during Chainsaw Man's weaker endeavors just makes my eyes roll. Like, surely we could find a different series to be pick-me's over. I mean, I hear that Ichi the Witch is currently taking fandom applications. Let me paint you a picture. You're a teenage girl, more than likely white, and you got autism, ADHD, BPD, osteoporosis. So you're on everything. Syrup, painkillers, cigarettes, weed, Hennessy, vodka. And for some reason, you find yourself on the internet, most likely as a form of escapism. More than likely, you were either on or were around the Tumblr era of the internet. The Legend of Korra's, the Steven Universe's, the Voltrons, maybe even My Little Pony and Undertale. You become invested in not only these types of shows that have more liberal and queer accepting writing styles, but you become obsessed with the fandoms that come along with them. but just being involved isn't enough for you. It is almost as if your oppressor instincts, your ancestral need to colonize and claim the community of others, maybe because these shows encourage that type of self-expression, or maybe just because you're young, you start hijacking these fandoms, making conversations revolve around ships, being none the wiser to the series' flaws because at least your fave is on screen. Hell, you rep the fave to your dying breath because your way of media consumption has you literally imprint yourself onto fiction, as if that fiction is all that you are, an all-consuming meta-entity. It's parasocial, a sort of lust consumed your mind, and you've turned hypersexual. But you don't care. Hell, if anyone else points this out, then you get to wave around the different sicknesses and disabilities going on with you, to paint the criticism of others as something it isn't, talking over other minorities when they bring up the problematic nature of some writing choices, like, I don't know, a victim of oppression joining the operations of the oppressors. Because it doesn't matter what, say, people of color have to say, you're mentally ill, so you win the oppression Olympics. And why stop there? You use your own experiences with mental health, queerness, and imagine the art you love as, let's be frank, more woke than it actually is. Horikoshi will have a gay Bakudeku ending. It will break the shackles that other manga that I haven't read because this is my first and only manga besides maybe Jujutsu Kaisen would never dare to shatter. Because why wouldn't it? The foreshadowing is all there. You guys just don't see it because you're homophobic. Did I mention I was autistic?
I'm on everything.
Now, let's step in the shoes of someone else. You're, let's say, neurotypical, more than likely a person of color. Maybe you have a love for sports, a fascination with NBA 2K, or maybe you're a European literature head. Maybe you're of middle class and especially of lower class. Regardless, internet culture is something you're unaware of. You're just here to gas up your favorite series while devaluing the series of others, albeit playfully. You might also be here to power scale. Let's ignore the Fushoshis for a minute. There are people on the internet who choose to express themselves in a certain way, talk in a certain way, and do normal fandom stuff. And there's a part of this that weirds you out, because you weren't exposed to queer people or anything of the sort. Hell, maybe your parents instilled in you some sort of semi-conservative black Christian values. So you see all of this and find it odd, because let's be frank, pop culture and queer fandom expression is kind of hand in hand at this point. For some, maybe you spend all your time fighting with these normal anime fans, and in turn, you get a kick out of embarrassing the more toxic shippers and the whites that think they're more oppressed than you because they get more sad than normal. Maybe you're this hyper-aggressive gym bro in group chats who might be a good person, maybe not, but you're just ignorant to the way the world has changed outside of your neighborhood. But frankly, that doesn't excuse the fact that some of y'all are unwilling to learn.
Oh shit, bruh. You talking about me?
Maybe you choose to mind your business in this regard and do other things to silence the voices that align politically with something you can't comprehend. So you make a group chat. I'm not going to name a specific group chat, I'll just make something up. Let's say your group is called the Chad Hive, and instead of making your ultra-masculine and red-pill thinking apparent, like these other folk, the way you get your rocks off is by belittling the intelligence of others when they don't agree with your interpretation of a story, making yourself the superior in mind publicly, while discussing how your body and soul is superior behind closed doors, a form of pseudo-fascism. I don't really touch on it on this channel because my internet reputation is often irrelevant to the discussion, but one of the lingering sentiments on my last video was, how the hell could you mess up a Radman dunk? Have you seen his tweets? He should be easy to make fun of. But that very question ignores the greater context of what I was going for, but I realized that the greater context was delivered in a way that was insatiable for the common folk. I see that now, and I apologize. So allow me to readjust my approach. I have never seen such an annoying and hopeless group of individuals in my life. All the animanga community is bickering, dogpiling, an orgy of people who don't want to face the possible flaws within themselves or their mutuals or friends, and instead just want to create a circle jerk of free dunks instead. Whether it be a community of pathetic and performative individuals who think their favorite manga is a progressive piece of art, or a wonderful slice of hope slop when all the author is doing is creating action figures he can put in jars, or a community community of lesser beings who think just liking something isn't good enough, so they put meaning where there is none and rush to their MAGA hats when you think it's a little bit ridiculous. I think a lot of the stories that are liked and are talked about fundamentally don't work in their own framework, and I've talked about that a lot of times before. A lot of the popular shonen that has released in the wake of the Big Three's ending, you can even include the Big Three into this statement, have so many plot points, character developments, themes that just don't work. They're stories that contradict themselves, say one thing and do another. They forsake their central cast members to develop people that offer no connection between the page and the audience, and they're stories that are touted to be about a social and individual consciousness, but then go on to oppress the characters that need it the most. Notice this never happens with good stories. You never get niche threads on Mob Psycho. You don't have people projectile vomit slurs at someone when they dislike the Ava rebuilds, and no one even talks about Fullmetal Alchemist anymore. That's the worst part about it. These people don't act bigoted or obtuse over good shit, things that are actually well put together. They only go to bat for the ones that just freaking suck. And at the very least, I would be fine with that if there was any hope in an actual conversation. I can't stand Ramen Yahoo's demeanor, but I'll sit through a 5-hour video to see why I'm wrong. But none of these people are actually smart enough, articulate enough, or locked in enough to put together words for why they disagree with me. And trust me, I see the irony of calling other people stupid in a video criticizing when other people call people stupid, but some of y'all are just dumb. A few years ago, what feels like a lifetime ago, I made a video where I basically said goodbye to MHA as it was, in the community at large. And if you know anything about me, you know that I did walk away from the fanbase for a time, only really returning to troll, quite frankly. But I realize now that trying to leave the MHA fanbase and enter the greater manga community at large was wrong. Because the problems I had with the air, the vibe, the behavior of the fanbase was just gonna be the behavior of everyone else. It's funny that both subsets of the internet fought with each other for so long over which series is better, but in the end they turn out to be the same with their response to criticism. Criticism towards the series they love, and criticism for who they are as people. And you know what, maybe it's because we live in an age where everyone is on edge. Not only has the internet adopted more conservative values, but I think COVID had a hand in emotionally detaching a lot of people to others, and hell, to media as a whole. We've kind of just gotten a lot meaner, and there's a sense that the pure and innocent sincerity I saw in the manga community so long ago is just not enough anymore. This medium has to be an amalgamation of things it never wanted to be or even was, because otherwise, what else are we doing here? In my attempts to try and help people understand why I find these stories to be so broken, to try and harken back to a period of manga discourse I figured we'd all miss, in my attempt to anger and enrage the individuals who truly deserved it after all the headaches they've given to people over disagreeing with their pseudo-intellectual rhetoric, in my attempt to paint Radman Yahoo as the very thesis and personification of all my issues with the community, in turn, I just revealed to myself that everything I said applied to a bigger pool of people than I ever could have imagined. What I've learned from all of this is that we are not in a period where people enjoy media. We are in a period where people are in love with their own interpretations of media, their own headcanon. They think that someone questioning the act of adding unnecessary subtext to a series means that you're against being analytical, and I was stupid to think otherwise. I was stupid to think those who are part of a more accepting group of people that these conservative manga readers have repeatedly insulted publicly and privately, were any different fandom-wise from the culture of people I was criticizing in the last episode. I was an idiot to think that Israel was a land of people far away that we could all laugh at. No. We are in Israel! At the end of the day, right or left, gay or straight, black or white, the manga community is unified on one thing. No one can stand when their favorite manga is challenged. Maybe I am hard to please, but I'd rather be that than be so brain dead that I insult others over a piece of fiction, make up things that don't exist to justify my toxic enjoyment, or betray others in my circle just because I'm too much of an idiot to truly think about what I'm consuming. This isn't just the internet anymore. This isn't just manga to me. It's bigger than that. You guys just suck, period. Art is a beautiful thing. I know it can come across as pessimistic and bitter in my videos, but I genuinely do believe that. I just hate how it can be treated. A breeding ground where authors can uplift the idea of stagnation and an audience who loves these stories for that reason. The way the ignorant, the smart alecks, the perverted, or millennials that infantilize themselves and victimize themselves over the dumbest of discourses has left the medium with an audience that cares not about the actual story, especially if that story isn't the same as what it once was, but people who only care for their own headcanons, their enjoyment, their toxicity, and their ego. When popular battle shonen is bad, it can feel like something you've devoted yourself to, hyper-fixated over, has betrayed you. But when its fandom sucks too, and you have a group of people telling you how you feel is invalid, it can make things so much more difficult to deal with. An overly positive YouTube culture that discourages criticism and seemingly only allows 5-hour videos about some innocuous piece of media being this life-changing phenomenon. Forums and customers thoughtlessly churning out money and obsessing over whatever IP, company, or studio they love or stan. Fanbases full of political extremists, some not even knowing it because institutions bigger than them have instilled ignorance and stubbornness. People who go from fandom to fandom and bring toxicity and annoying beliefs with them. Social media platforms that encourage connectivity, full of people who would rather reside in cultic echo chambers. Everybody I talk to about this, either in real life or on the platform, tells me that I shouldn't have expected anything different, that the web has always been a breeding ground for toxicity. Maybe that's true, but I think there was a time where people really did consider what they were consuming, people who evaluated what they liked and disliked, and obviously not everyone could articulate what they were thinking, but regardless of some from the general audience being unable to explain why they like something, they still had their reasons, personal or things more tangible. Now, the internet has regressed and become a place where toxic positivity has run rampant, and the only people that are left are forced to keep this shtick going, otherwise they too will come under fire for the sin of disliking something. The internet, because of its assured freedom of expression and extreme connectivity, was such an important place for me. Now that same place has rejected people like me, and yet, here I am, still making videos. Honestly, given the audience of vitriol I've created and the heartbreak it's left behind, the easier solution would be just to walk away from all of the stress and the effort. But unfortunately, it's just not an option for me. Because I've seen it. Chainsaw Man is very relatable, not in the coming of age sense either. I've already talked about how Chainsaw Man is impersonal. It's not a diary, it's not a thought bubble either, it's an experiment. And the experiment worked for a time, but for a cinephile with seemingly so many influences, ideas, and topics he would love to cover, do I really believe that Chainsaw Man is the work he wants to be doing? And that's the question I always ask myself when in these conditions. All I can do is ask why. I mean, I know what it's like to be rejected, so maybe Hori tried his best to stop that from happening. I know what it's like to want to change the landscape, but maybe not executing it in the right way. And I know that burnout, or in Chainsaw Man's case, writer's block, constantly pains me. When you're like me and you recognize the problem with 3 of the biggest post-Big 3 shonen, whether that be MHA's fear of rejection, JJK's lack of respect for the art form, or Chainsaw Man's burnout plaguing an entire passion project, and you yourself are a creator, I feel like you have to keep going, lest you end up in the same boat creatively. This is why I think it's so important to be honest about the quality and the state of a given work. For future storytellers, audiences who want to expand their palette, or people who just want to consume things better. Because when a story doesn't work, we can learn a lot from the why, and I have learned a lot. I've learned that the only way you can remain passionate for a medium or a hobby or a vision, especially ones that have changed for the worse over time, is by reclaiming that feeling for yourself, re-examining what made you fall in love in the first place, because otherwise the voices, the culture, the apathy will just consume you, and I'm done letting it consume me. People want politics to stay out of their anime, and while I understand that to a degree, because animation is sort of escapism, I don't believe that these shows just want to be mindless fantasy like Solo Leveling or something. A lot of these popular shonen want to have something meaningful to say, and as we've gone over, most of them usually can't. The anime community, especially lately after the election, has increased in its level of bigotry. Some attribute that to Chibi's fanbase. Some claim it's always been a part of the given language of anime culture. I've experienced personal offenses from every corner of the medium, and I can't not act like some of this is in response to white liberals or even marginalized shonen junkies being too freaking annoying. Trust me, Jujutsu Kaisen fans that aren't named Josh are terrorists, and even then I see the shit he puts on my timeline. But again, I just can't see this as an excuse. Being annoying doesn't mean you get to call me the N-word. So is that it? Is shonen just a hellscape for gooners and fascists? I think it can be, sometimes, as like I said before, there's a lot of slop out there made by degenerates for degenerates, but I do think if you're willing to sort through all of that, I think there's a genuinely beautiful medium waiting for you, with its own flaws and freakish tendencies, sure, but I think giving up on this genre of fiction as a whole because of some bad apples is, in a way, letting these people win and letting them get to you. It's letting awful stories get in the way of experiencing great ones. As long as you're getting something productive out of this, whether it's enjoyment or criticism, then despite all the degeneracy that's on display or the bigotry that's been dropped in your lap, you've effectively repurposed a movement that maybe deep down, or at least at first, was made for people like you.